At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability, ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-El-Samad.
And people last week liked our Soul Bearing smack talk about automotive journalism, so there's more of that to come this week. But first, we've got acronym soup. We've got CES, NAIAS, and then...
or NAIAS,
right,
as we call
NAIAS.
it here.
I wasn't going to try, but NAIAS. And then questions, so let's get to it.
All righty. And before we get going, I just want to give a quick shout out, or in the terminology debuted by the guys at Relay FM, a follow out to the guys at the Accidental Tech Podcast, Casey Liss and Marco Arment and John Siracusa. For anybody that's listening this time because you heard Casey mention Wheelbearings podcast, welcome, and we hope you enjoy it. And make sure you keep listening to ATP as well.
What did they say about us? Do you know?
Well, I had sent in a note regarding something they had been talking about. John's wife had just got a new Honda Accord, and they were trying to figure out whether or not it had support for Apple CarPlay. And so I sent a note and to some feedback into those guys to say, yeah, most of the 2017 Accords do have CarPlay and Android Auto support, but it turns out that they bought one of the sport trim level, which the two lower trim levels, the LX and the Sport, are the only ones that don't have the touchscreen display radio, and those don't have support for CarPlay and Android Auto. So her car apparently does not have that. But all the other trim levels, the EX and above, all have that radio and thus have that support.
You know why Honda does that? Because everybody would choose an EX with, they would choose the cheaper car, because you could actually use Android Auto or Apple CarPlay and get a better infotainment system than the EX has.
That's true.
I just don't like the interface. The system itself is actually not bad. It's a little Byzantine, but anyway, we don't need to rehash. It's cool that we got a shout out. I feel not as talented as those guys, so thank you for that. And, while we're talking about cars, let's talk about what we're driving. I know you were at both of the shows, so you put on 22 miles on your feet, but you've also been driving actually a very interesting vehicle, especially as China or Chinese automakers edge closer to selling stuff in our market. What have you been driving this week?
I have been driving the first Chinese-built vehicle that has been exported to the U.S. and put on sale to the general public. I think there have been a handful of some BYD plug-in hybrids that have been sold or leased to some fleets for use for testing. But I've got the Buick Envision, which is Buick's new midsize crossover that actually debuted in China, I think, about 3 years ago, and finally arrived here in the U.S. Last year in 2016. And it's based on the same platform as the Chevy Equinox and the GMC Terrain, but it's a little bit longer than those two, so get a little bit more room inside. And as I mentioned, it's built in China. And then exported here because China is essentially at this point the main reason why the Buick brand still exists. Buick would have been on the chopping block during GM's bankruptcy back in 2009, but because they sell so many of them in China, it was deemed important to keep the Buick brand alive here as well.
And so why do they build the Envision? Because it's like, this is a vehicle that they build here in the U.S. too. I mean, it's maybe it's a little longer, but you would think that GM could set up a plant that's flexible enough to build all flavors. This is still Theta, right?
Yeah, it's based on the Theta platform. And to be honest, I'm I'm not really sure. I don't think the sales volumes are that huge for it. I mean, Buick sales in North America in general are, they're okay, but they're nowhere near what they are in China. I mean, they sell, I think, well over 1 million Buicks a year in China. But here it's on the order of a couple of 100,000. So I think the Envision, sales of the Envision are only a small fraction of what the Terrain and Equinox are. So I guess I'm not sure. I think to some degree it's kind of an experiment, to see what the market would accept here. Oh,
to be like knowing that it's a Chinese built vehicle and sort of putting that out there and saying like, well, here it is. This is a vehicle that we built in China, knowing that I'm sure they knew they could pivot too and pull production stateside if they needed to, if it met with lots of,
if there was enough demand, they could certainly do that.
Yeah.
They sold, I think, I'm not sure when it went on sale, but it was sometime in mid-year, and through the end of 2016, they sold just over 14,000 of them here in the U.S. And they sold 3,900 in December. And for comparison, GM sold 27,000 Equinoxes and 7,400 Terrains. So it's fairly small volume compared to the others. So it's hard to say why they decided to bring it in from China, but it certainly, compared to the reputation that some of the Chinese domestic brands have gotten when they've shown cars here, like at the Detroit Auto Show. And let's just say that none of the stuff that we've seen from China so far over here, in fact, most of the Chinese domestic brands, that we've seen in China, would probably qualify as being ready for prime time.
They're getting better though. Every time, like every year, they're making strides.
Yeah, they're definitely making progress. The Envision starts at $34,000 here in the U.S. and runs up. I guess close to 60 grand.
What?
Close to 50.
I was just, fully it's still loaded. Kind of like what, but
yeah.
And so, which version? Do you have the 2.5 liter 4-cylinder or the 2 liter turbocharged?
I have the turbo, which is getting okay fuel economy, but it's not great. It's so far. I picked it up on Saturday and it's Tuesday now. So driving back and forth to Detroit 3 times in the last 3 days, it's averaged about 21 miles per gallon, which for compact to midsize modern crossover is only kind of so.
I mean, that's not too far off from what I would expect. The trade-off is that you've got a pretty healthy power plant there. You could go down to the 2.5 and you've got about 50 less horsepower, 55 fewer horsepower. And the mileage will creep up probably to the mid 20s. So for, an extra 4 or 5 miles per gallon, you're missing out on a much more pleasant driving experience, in my opinion.
Yeah. This one, it's got 6-speed automatic transmission, which, a lot of GM's more recent cars built over here have 8 and are now switching to 9 speeds, GM's new 9-speed. The premium trim level that I have runs about $46,000, and it's pretty well loaded. It's got heated seats, heated steering wheel. It's pretty nicely finished inside. It's got all the driver assist systems. It's got adaptive cruise control and the high end audio system. But it's for 46 grand, for 46 grand, it's nice but not great. I don't think it would be my first choice.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of materials and finish and all of that stuff, I'm sure it feels a little bit like a stretch at 46, but in the mid 30s, like for class competitive wise, is it?
Yeah, in the mid 30s, it's certainly, mid to upper 30s, it probably would have been fine. I think, but I do think at 46, it's definitely pushing it. I think, for this kind of money, I would probably, step up to the Cadillac XT5.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Yeah,
I think is a better looking vehicle, in roughly the same size class, and similar hardware.
Starts at $39,395. The XT5 does. So,
yeah.
I mean, the trade-off obviously is like you're going to get the Buick much more loaded than you would the Cadillac, except for some of those things that are exclusively Cadillac.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think GM really wants to make a case for there being a different buyer for Buick than there is for Cadillac, and I'm not sure that that's so much the case. I don't know. They've got demographic research to kind of back it up for them, but for both brands, they're trying to basically push the average age down. And so it's kind of Buick and Cadillac are competing for the same territories. Buick at this point is kind of like
and they've been
Mercury.
making progress on that. I mean, their average the average age of their customers has come down quite a bit over the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah,
I'm not sure exactly what they are right now for each brand, but I know they are down from where they were a decade ago. So they've been making progress on that count, and certainly overall Buick sales here in North America have been at least stable and growing at a slight pace. Adding extra crossovers to their lineup has certainly helped. Their sedan sales, like most sedans, in the last 4 or 5 years, have been in pretty steady decline. But they've got the small Encore at the bottom end. They've got the Enclave at the high end, and the Envision in the middle. So they've got a pretty solid lineup of crossovers, which is something, at this point you really can't say for Cadillac yet. Right now they have only the XT5.
Right. But the problem is that the Cadillac's going to duplicate that too. We know that they're going to have an XT7, and we know they may have, an XT3 if we can try to make any kind of sense out of their naming convention. They'll have something along those lines. They'll get one that's a little smaller.
Yeah, there'll be something smaller and something bigger. And, I wouldn't be surprised if there were, even 2 smaller ones, to go up against the likes of the BMW X1 and X3.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm starting to feel like there's very little room for that mid-luxury nameplate like Buick to exist anymore. They're kind of, they're in the same predicament that Mercury was, although Buick's product is better. Buick has a solid lineup, but
and Buick's products are more distinguished, visually and equipment wise from Chevrolet, for example, and Cadillac than Buick or that Mercury ever was at Ford. Mm-hmm. Mercury was a little more than Ford with a different grille. And they've certainly done a better job of setting Buick apart from Chevrolet and Cadillac. And like I said, the main reason the Buick brand, continues to be sold at all is, at this point, for the most part, Buick's cars and most of Buick's models, aside from the Envision, and the Enclave, are basically all borrowed from Opel. They're rebadged Opels, which, again, there's nothing wrong with that. The Regal is an Opel, insignia. And the LaCrosse actually is unique to North America and China, so that one didn't come from Opel, but the Cascada and the Encore are both borrowed from Opel. So it's a mix of stuff from Opel and and stuff from China, and so there's not a lot of incremental cost for GM to do these vehicles and offer them here.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's certainly got to be cheaper for them to keep Envision production in China and just put them on boats and ship them over here versus, setting up a production facility. And, it really just makes me think like GM turned Saturn into Oldsmobile and then killed Oldsmobile. And then Buick got turned into Saturn after they killed Saturn.
Well, they turned Saturn into Oldsmobile, and then after that, they turned it into Opel. And then when they killed Saturn, then they switched the Opels over to Buick. Yeah,
it's just it's looking back with nostalgia. It's just an interesting commentary. I think there's certainly a place for the Envision. It's a good product to have here, but among all the competition, it's just competing with itself, or GM competing with itself is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and we'll get back to that a little bit later on when we get into our discussion of the Detroit Auto Show. But what are you driving this week?
This week, I just got out of is it a Hyundai Genesis or Genesis?
It's just Genesis now.
Right. So it's a Genesis G80 all-wheel drive. So it has the H-track. Man, this is a nice car. Really, really well done. It's not just nicely luxurious, which the first generation Genesis was luxuriously outfitted, and they really did their homework on materials and that kind of stuff. But this one is really all of a piece, and it took me by surprise because it's not every media car that you drive that really sort of like feels like it submits to you, right? Like it's yours. It drives like it's your car. And I know that's kind of a like off in the clouds statement to make, but it's there's that connection between driver and car that not every car can muster at least that quickly. And this car just like it hit all the right notes. It's a big car, so it has some of that big sedan feel, but it's nimble on its feet. The ride and handling balance is magnificent. They did a really, really good job. And I know they had help from Lotus when they initially developed this generation of Genesis. And it was completely worth it. It's just got that very unflustered, supple, yet, long wheel travel kind of thing that BMW was known for a long time. Kind of, chassis calibration. It's got enough structural rigidity to manage that as well, so you don't feel it like flexing. The older platform, which you can still get as the Kia K900, that feels a lot more flexible.
Yeah, it does.
It's not a terrible car, but it's not of the same caliber. Like this is definitely, it's a serious attempt at really competing on merit with vehicles like the Lexus LS and the BMW 5 and 7 series and Mercedes. I wouldn't say S class, but it's about that size. I just feel like it's hard to go up against the S class. The S class is such a sort of beacon. But man, I am so impressed. It just even the V6, it's a 311 horsepower engine. It's just got about 290 pound-feet of torque. Feels really, really strong. There's no reason for the V8 in this car. It moves right along.
And I think it's pretty reasonable to assume, something that we'll get to later, that the next generation of the G80 probably won't offer a V8.
Yeah, but I guarantee you the next generation of the G80 is still going to be a screaming bargain. So this car was very nicely equipped. It had the premium package, which is the LED fog lights, panoramic roof, Lexicon audio system, 7-inch infotainment systems, and their infotainment system is actually very good. It's easy to use. It has a control knob down on the console as well. The perforated leather with piping, so it's dressed up real nice. Okay, so some of that's the ultimate package as well, as I'm looking. And actually, I had the upgraded 9-inch screen. So just overall, really, really well done. $53,000. I was astounded.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's, that is, an amazing value for what you're getting in that car.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like they cheaped out anywhere. Like you look it over it.
And I mean, you look at it, the styling of it, it looks like an expensive car.
Yeah. Well, once again, it's that Kia Hyundai, or well, Hyundai Kia in this case, where, expensive styling, like true styling, like, cutting fashion doesn't have to be expensive. It typically is because they can afford the stylists. But I think Hyundai and Kia made a very conscious investment in their design staff back a few years ago, about 10 years ago now. And every car they make is it looks like $1 million. Probably. Yeah. And that may be underselling what it costs to actually style them, but still it's it just like it drives home the point, like, style doesn't have to be expensive, and the execution, I'm very impressed with the execution. The materials are all fantastic in this car. And overall really just the driving really, really impressed me. I haven't felt sort of as comfortable behind the wheel of things like the 5 and 7 Series BMWs. They're fun. You have them for a week, and obviously they're pricey German cars, and they're sort of the flagships, but they don't necessarily feel like they've got your back, and that you know what they're going to do, and where the responsiveness is, and so that's something that had been lacking for so long with Hyundai. They could put the car together on paper. It would have all the features, it would have the price, it would measure up on that sort of spreadsheet discussion, but then you'd go take it out on the road and it just wouldn't gel. This sort of flips that around. This car is really nice to drive, and I've driven it before, and I guess either I didn't come away as impressed the last time because it hadn't been tweaked, or I don't know. Maybe I'm just in a charitable mood this week. I don't know. Very impressed.
No, it's a good solid car, and I've got one coming in a couple of weeks. So I'll be able to give you a second impression at that point. It's been a couple of years since I drove one.
Yeah.
And that was before they separated the Genesis brand away from Hyundai. So at that time it was just the Hyundai Genesis, and now Genesis is its own sub brand. And they've got the two models, the G80 and the G90, which the G90 is the replacement for the old Equus, and they've got some other models coming. They've got a crossover or two, and something smaller than the G80 as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll review this one too. I've been putting some thoughts together. So like I did, I don't know if anybody saw, I'm sure you saw, where I just had a post from last year that never got picked up by anybody. I had pitched it around and nobody wanted it. So I was like, I'm just going to put it up because I like the pictures. So the FT86 post that I put over on Extra Mile podcast, I'll do the same for this one, for the Hyundai G80 or the Genesis G80. And then just share it via our Facebook, so people can see what other sort of deeper thoughts I have on it if they're interested. And then I'd love to follow up with what you think about it once you have a chance. Are you getting the G80 or the G90? The
G80.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. Tell me if I'm off my rocker.
Yeah. The only thing to me that's disappointing about the G80 is the new naming convention. Yet another, alphanumeric names.
Yeah.
Which thankfully, Kia did not do for their latest product.
Yeah. Well, then it's a good pivot, I guess. Should we talk about NAIAS first or CES?
So I spent last week at CES in Las Vegas, 4 days out there, and the big thing about CES, there's been a lot of consternation in the industry, here in Detroit, over the last several years, because CES and the Detroit Auto Show either follow immediately one right after the other, with CES coming first and the Auto Show coming right after, or in some cases, I think next year's schedule actually has the two shows running simultaneously.
Well, and we do the same thing here in Boston too. Our very important Boston Auto Show runs concurrently with Detroit. I mean,
you have a Boston Auto Show?
Yeah, we do actually, and every now and then they debut something here. It's interesting.
But so we've seen in recent years, fewer product introductions here in Detroit, but that's actually not something that's unique to the show, the North American International Auto Show here in Detroit. That's actually something that's been happening at every major auto show in Los Angeles, New York, in Europe, at Geneva, Frankfurt, and Paris. There's been fewer and fewer new product introductions, and there's this trend that's been happening where manufacturers have been pulling their cars away and wanting to do standalone events. So that basically they can get all the attention on their car, so they're not fighting for attention with all the other manufacturers at an auto show, which, to a degree that's fine. But, there's also a lot of additional costs associated with that when they do standalone events. But, a lot of people have taken to blaming CES as part of the problem, for the reduction in introductions here in Detroit. And it's actually not the case, because there's never really been much in the way of new product introductions from car makers at CES. It's not like the companies that make TVs and internet connected refrigerators and cell phones. the car companies that are going there, they're mainly talking about technology features. So they've been showing autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles and things like that. And the focus, definitely seems to be, I think the reason that they seem to be going to CES seems to be, to get in front of a different group of media than you typically would find in an auto show. A lot of technology media that are not normally exposed to these automotive technologies. But these are the same people that are writing about companies like Google and Apple and Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft. And, the coverage that they give to those technology companies is the kind of coverage, and also to a lot of startups, that coverage is reflected in the way the financial markets see those companies and value those markets. So both, for public companies, Wall Street, but also for venture capitalists. And, you end up getting these technology companies with, massive valuations, so you end up, with companies like Uber, that lose $3 billion a year, valued at, $65 billion. Versus
ludicrous.
Versus a car company that makes, $10 billion in profit, having half that valuation, all because, they actually make stuff.
But that's what I was going to say. Like, Uber doesn't make anything.
Right.
Except for scandals.
Yeah.
Like and at CES, so there's some of this, there's some of what I've seen from this and from the North American International shows is like the sort of mainstream press and high tech press. Like, the mainstream press does all the gee whiz stories, but and that's been the story of both shows, really. But it's definitely CES was like all of the autonomy stuff, because it is coming and they're working very hard on it, and technology integrations. It's just, that's an ongoing thing. But also, like, the tech press seems to have this opinion that automakers are this very old line industry and they're not innovative and they're not high tech anymore. It's like, it's almost like they're treating it like, blacksmiths.
Yeah.
or something. And it's like,
buggy whip manufacturers.
Yeah. And that's just so not the case. I mean, I think that we probably own the only other product that we have that maybe has like half of the sophistication that an automobile has in it is our smartphone. And it doesn't even come close
to matching the capability, the technological sophistication of a modern car. Because most modern cars now, increasingly, modern cars essentially have, the guts of cell phones built into them, for their telematics systems. They've got infotainment systems that, whatever you may think of their user interface, from a technological standpoint, they have as much or more capability. And then you've got all the other stuff that makes up a car, plus all the safety features, that, are required to be built in there. And, all the regulations that car makers have to meet in order to put a car on sale.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to sit back in Silicon Valley and to, throw stones and say, oh, look at those guys, they can't get it done. Look at that interface and stuff. As much as I complain about the infotainment systems, part of it is just like they feel like, the user experience isn't great, but the hardware itself, I generally like, it has to be the way it has to be for a variety of reasons. But one of them is it has to be very reliable
and durable.
Right. And handle temperature extremes and just, people just don't accept their cars having failures the same as they accept their smartphones having failures. So, yeah, I mean, you
take a car out or you take a phone out, or a camera in, 5 or 10 degree weather. And, if you leave it outside exposed to that for a few minutes, it's going to stop working. Same thing in extremely hot temperatures. But, a car, a typical car will start just fine at 40 below zero and operate just fine at, 120 or more. So without any problem, and, it'll run for 20 years. Most modern cars will run for 20 years with nothing more than basic maintenance.
Yeah. So I just, I get that impression that there's that friction between the two sides of things. And not everybody sort of gives that off for sure. And I think it is great that automakers are getting out there and really trying to figure out how to converge these sort of two different industries. And certainly autonomy is continues to be one of the bigger stories of, CES. But also, I mean, you were at the Faraday Future thing, so you have to tell us what that was about.
Yeah, that was in some ways a bit of a train wreck, much like the company itself. It was an exceptionally long presentation that was dominated by a lot of self-important and overwrought language.
What, from a Silicon Valley company?
Well, actually, they're not from Silicon Valley. They're based in Los Angeles.
I'll close enough.
Yeah.
From a California company.
Yeah.
Says the New Englander. Sorry.
Yeah. So
carry on.
Which is, I mean, to me, it's really a shame that, in all likelihood, Faraday Future is probably going to fail as a company. They're probably, the company's probably going to collapse, have a financial collapse in the coming months, just because of lack of money. Because there's actually a lot of really good, really smart people working there that are capable of doing some amazing things. And there's a lot of really cool ideas in their car, the FF91. And it'll be a shame if they don't get an opportunity to, really to bring those to market. But, just to give you an example of what this event was like, at one stage in the presentation, Nick Sampson, who is VP of operations, I think, I can't remember exactly what his title is, but he is effectively in charge these days at Faraday Future, since they don't actually have a CEO, and many of their top executives have left the company in the last month or so. But he talked about their factory, which is supposed to go in North Las Vegas. They got $1 billion worth of tax breaks from the state of Nevada and the city of North Las Vegas. And he said, he got up there and talked about how, we've completed the first phase of construction of the factory, and then proceeded, said, and here's a video showing us showing us doing that first phase of construction, and then proceeded to run about a minute long video, which consisted of nothing more than earth movers moving dirt. I mean, literally all they have done is move dirt. They have not poured an ounce of concrete yet, or laid any foundations. They have moved.
Well, it's site work.
Yeah, they have moved dirt, and that work stopped at least a month or two ago, apparently because of late payments to contractors. And when that will resume is unclear. And then at another point in the presentation, YT Jia, who's the founder and CEO of LeEco, who's the main financial backer for Faraday.
Wait a minute, though. I thought Faraday was put up as collateral for. Is it LeEco's cars, or is it
who knows? I mean, it's so convoluted. I mean, there's all kinds of bizarre financials going on, and Jalopnik actually had a really good story. They looked into this, and looked into some of the financials and what money was going where. But as far as most of whatever money has come in to Faraday, and then ultimately gone out, came in via Mr. Jia. But he drove the car out, about a third of the way across the presentation stage, and stopped, got out of the car, and then and this was about 35-40 minutes into the presentation, into the event. And then got up and proceeded to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes. And, unfortunately, his first language is not English, I shouldn't say unfortunately. His first language is not English, and most of what he said was largely unintelligible to the audience. And from a PR perspective, I think it would have been more productive to have him come up and, give a greeting, maybe do the initial introduction, rather than try to speak so much about the car to an audience that largely could not understand what he was saying.
Wait a minute. I thought you didn't like working in the PR industry. Now you're giving good, solid advice. I'm teasing.
Yeah. And then after he finished his talk, he went back to the car and pressed the button to do what was supposed to be a demonstration of the car's autonomous self-parking capability, and the car did not move. And they tried again for a minute or so and finally gave up. And Nick Sampson, came back and said, looks like the car is feeling a little bit timid tonight. It's prototype cars. These things are not done, and demo fails are not at all unusual, especially at CES. I mean, most companies at CES have had demo fails at some point or another.
Microsoft.
They've had
Bill Gates had a blue screen of death.
Yeah, man. Microsoft has had some classics at CES. But it was kind of indicative of the whole thing. They said they're going to start taking deposits on the cars, and they have two levels of they opened up the reservation system. And you have two levels of reservation. You can get a priority reservation, which requires a $5,000 deposit, or you can get a regular reservation, which is free of charge. And they claim they got 64,000 reservations in the first day, but they refused to say how many of those actually came with $5,000 deposits.
I was going to say, I'd sign up for a reservation if it was free.
Yeah. Well, the only problem is they said nothing about how much the car was going to cost. And based on the specifications, with 130 kilowatt hour battery pack and 400-mile range and 1,000 horsepower, it's pretty reasonable to assume that this thing is going to cost at least $150,000. And what's not clear is, how much of a real market there is for $150,000, 1,000 horsepower EVs. You've got Tesla, you've got Lucid Motors, now Faraday. I think, somebody's got to start, taking a more realistic approach to the market. And, obviously Tesla is moving into more mainstream market with the Model 3, and Lucid has taken a much more realistic approach, to how they've promoted their car. They're not claiming that, as Faraday is, that they're going to reformat transportation and reformat the auto industry. It was all kind of really bizarre. And like I say, unfortunately, I don't think that their company is going to survive, which is a shame, because like I said, a lot of good people working in California are going to be, probably out of work, when this whole thing collapses. But I hope not. I hope somehow they get some good management in there and, manage to find some financing to build something really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so part of me feels like like you said, the market is starting to get saturated for these ultra high end baubles. Really, they're toys, for people who can afford them. And that's cool. And I know that Tesla set the mold for that, and they, it made some sense, I think, when they did it, where you have to have those early adopters be wealthy people, and they're going to basically finance you refining this thing until you can then again make it cheaper. And automobiles themselves. Yeah,
I think the overall strategy that Tesla had, like you said, starting at the high end, using that to gain experience and start generating some revenue to finance the development of more mainstream vehicles, I think in general was a good strategy. And I mean, they've had some execution problems with the vehicles that they've brought to market so far. But that doesn't take away from the good side of the strategy as a whole.
Yeah. And, what we really need, though, is kind of half shame on the press, even the automotive press, for just buying this thing like hook, line, and sinker. I can't tell you how many stories I saw Faraday future, this car, reinvents everything. I'm like, no, it's this is one car on one show stage. Who knows if there's any more? And I know we've seen, other prototypes doing things that's all. It's difficult, but it's not that difficult. This is they're doing the easy part of what's hard right now.
Right.
I guess if or they're doing this is all low hanging fruit. Get it in production. Get it in production for a price. Stick to that price. Make it reliable. Make it repeatable. And then somebody needs to finally make us the Model T of electric vehicles, or this new age of vehicle that's electric, autonomous, and connected, and all of these wonderful things. I need the one that costs $35,000 or $30,000.
And, I mean, that's exactly what Tesla's aiming for with the Model 3 and GM with the Chevy Bolt and, most likely, Nissan with the second generation Leaf, which is supposed to be coming soon. And also Ford with their upcoming electric SUV.
Yeah, and if I had to put money on it, I'd say GM, Ford, Nissan are going to get there before any of these startups.
Yeah, I totally agree. But as for other stuff at CES, as I said, generally the automakers don't launch new products there. They occasionally show some concepts and they'll do demonstrations of their, they'll talk about, their technology strategies and demonstrate their autonomous vehicles, which, Hyundai did some demonstrations with their autonomous Ioniq, which unfortunately, due to a scheduling conflict, I was not able to get a ride in that one. NVIDIA was doing some stuff with theirs, and NVIDIA was actually they probably had the biggest news at CES. They for a couple of years now they've been developing an AI processing platform for autonomous vehicles. The latest version of that is called Drive PX2, which they've got. They will sell you a Drive PX2 unit, and it's designed as a development unit if you want to do autonomous development. And a lot of the companies, both suppliers and manufacturers, and a lot of the startups are using these things for their autonomous vehicle development. And we had 3 announcements at CES of companies that are going to commercialize that platform. And the strategy that NVIDIA is taking is very similar to their strategy, that they've had for a long, since they started with graphics cards for PCs, where they don't make and sell their own consumer graphics cards. What they do is they design the chips, the graphics processors, and then they license those to other manufacturers to build the boards. So NVIDIA will build a reference board, and show you the reference board, which is what the Drive PX2 is in the case of autonomous. And then they will license that to other manufacturers to sell it commercially to consumers. So, we had announcements from ZF, Bosch, and Audi last week that they are all going to be producing ECUs for electronic control units for autonomous vehicles based on the Drive PX2 platform, with ZF being the first starting in 2018, and then Bosch and Audi coming in 2020 for their stuff.
Well, and they're not the only company they're not the only ones who had that realization, like, hey, you know what? GPUs are these massive sort of multi-thread collections of processors that lend themselves really well to doing this kind of processing. Besides, 3D and computer workstations and ray tracing and all the things that have to go on when we're doing high-end graphics and video work, that kind of stuff is a direct port to the, because I'm trying to come up with like a modern, like a Xeon processor, or even the newer like Intel Core i7s or something even more modern. That's not the same kind of processor as GPU processors. That's sort of like a single task processor.
Right.
GPUs are basically
things like Intel's and AMD's processor. They're general purpose processors that are the main processors in a computer. Have a totally different kind of architecture and different operating capability from a GPU, either from NVIDIA or from AMD. Those things, like you said, they often have hundreds of processing cores that are very highly optimized for certain kinds of tasks. And as it turns out, they actually work really well, particularly for signal processing of the information from the sensors in an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah,
and then
because a lot
that.
of it is image processing.
Yeah,
a lot of it is sort of making sense of camera data.
Right.
So
and running neural networks to process all that stuff,
which is crazy.
Yeah,
in your car. And we had Ford brought Mark Fields back to CES too. So like you said last time, he was there for CES 10 years ago when they introduced Sync, and he came back.
Yeah, I mean, Fields was, I'm pretty sure, the first major auto executive to to be at CES in 2007. 10 years ago this week, when he took. And he didn't have a standalone event there. He took the stage with Bill Gates back then during the Microsoft keynote to announce the original version of Sync that went into the 2008 Focus, and then ultimately across the Ford lineup. And he's been back several times since, as well as Alan Mulally, the former CEO at Ford. But now as CEO, Fields was back on last Friday night to keynote at the Leaders in Technology dinner, which is part of CES. And his focus was really on connected cars and how connectivity is going to be critical for all of the new kinds of capabilities that we want to try and build into cars going forward to enable mobility services. So, for everything from vehicle to vehicle communications to telematics services. And he talked about, all the different kinds of services that can be built using the vehicle connectivity. So things like Ford Pass, where you can use your car to pay for things like parking, or, all kinds of other services. So it was a very interesting speech. And, what he was doing was encouraging people in the audience and companies that are participants at CES to, really think about, how, what kinds of apps and services you can build using the connectivity in vehicles to enhance mobility and enhance the experience of people as they're getting around in the world.
Do you think he was on point with his speech, or was it just sort of like Ford selling what Ford's making? No,
I mean he wasn't really trying to sell what they're making. What he's encouraging others to do is to build on what they're making. So they're creating. They're Ford and other automakers are creating these platforms that other developers can build on top of. To create different new kinds of services. So, I do think he was on point.
Well, we'll have to, oh shit. Did I lose you again?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. Just saw a thing. Okay, cool. We'll have to see what he's got up his sleeve for sort of the coming years to actually hit production too. Like, it's easy to go to CES and be like, yeah, we're going to do all these great things.
Yeah. Well, before we leave CES, should probably mention the announcement that Fields actually made earlier in the week. I was actually standing on the jetway at Detroit Metro Airport waiting to board my flight to Vegas on Tuesday morning when I got a notification on my phone that Ford was having a press conference 2 hours later at the Flat Rock Assembly Plant south of Detroit, where Ford builds the Lincoln Continental and the Mustang, and Fields was there to announce that they were going to be putting $700 million into Flat Rock, and he talked about some of the electrified vehicles that Ford promised at the end of 2015. They promised 13 new electrified models by 2020, and he identified what 7 of those are, and a couple of them are several of them are going to be built at Flat Rock. Including in addition to Mustang and Continental, they're adding production of 2 new vehicles there, one of which is going to be an all-electric SUV with a 300-mile driving range, and the other is going to be a hybrid, which is the Level 4 autonomous vehicle that they announced last August for ride-hailing services.
Yeah, I kind of skirted this topic just because my immediate thought, the immediate statement I want to make is like, this had nothing to do with Twitter bullies saying stuff, because the other part of this was like, okay, we're doing all this stuff in the US and we're not doing stuff in Mexico that we had been planning. And I think your take on it was actually that, like, yeah, it probably wasn't gonna, like, the Mexico thing that changed anyway. It was just a solid business decision, but in some ways Ford allowed that announcement to be sort of picked up and used as a sort of token shiny object for somebody else's political means, which felt kind of dirty to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's unfortunately that's typical PR. They use that opportunity to do something, to announce something that they would have done anyway, which is that they were canceling plans to build a new $1.6 billion assembly plant in Mexico. Ford announced a couple of years ago that they were going to build this plant and shift production of their small cars, the Focus and C-Max, from the Michigan assembly plant in Wayne, Michigan, to Mexico. That got a lot of criticism during last year's presidential campaign from Donald Trump. When they announced that they were no longer going to build that plant, of course, Mr. Trump tweeted that, he took credit for that decision. But in fact, the reality is that decision almost certainly would have happened regardless of who won the election, because in the time since that announcement was made, sales of those cars have continued to decline, as have sales of all, pretty much all cars, as the market shifts to crossovers and SUVs. And so Ford had excess capacity at their Hermosillo, Mexico plant, where they build the Fusion and Lincoln MKZ. So instead of building a new plant to build the Focus and C-Max, which were declining in sales anyway, they're just going to build those in Hermosillo using the excess capacity they have. So they're still going to Mexico. Right. They're just not going into a new plant that they didn't need.
Well, and does it matter that much to a incoming president? We're going to get off track here. So I'm going to kind of leave it alone and just back away and just say, perhaps we might want to look at the math that goes along with that and say, if you like cheap cars and cheap trucks, you should probably let the companies that know how to run the companies instead of some dude bloviating. Those carrier jobs, for instance, the tax breaks that they were given cost us all quite a bit to keep 700 jobs in Indiana. Not that I want people to be out of work, but just... Yeah.
No, I agree. All right, so...
I'll get off my soapbox. But, where I got us derailed. So where are we?
So with CES over, time to dive into the Detroit Auto Show.
All right, the Detroit Auto Show,
or more accurately, the North American International Auto Show in Detroit.
Yes, and so how was it this year? Was it a good Detroit or a bad Detroit?
Auto shows in general, like I said earlier, have kind of been on the decline in terms of media news. One of the general trends from car makers in the last few years has been they're building fewer wild concept cars. And that used to be one of the big news items that came out of auto shows. Like I remember my first year that I went to the Detroit show as media in 2007, so 10 years ago. Ford unveiled 3 concept cars that year, and that so they had the Ford Airstream concept, the Lincoln MKR, and the Ford Interceptor.
I loved all of those.
Yeah, they were cool, and that was also the year that GM showed the original Chevy Volt concept. There were a bunch of concepts that year, and back in in the last decade, there were a lot of concepts that came out at almost every auto show. And this year there were very few, and most of the concepts that we did see were loosely disguised versions of upcoming production cars. So you got a combination of fewer concept cars being made because they are really expensive to design and build, and then fewer new product introductions. And part of that was just because of the overall product cadence of stuff coming to market. There's, right now we're in a little bit of a lull. There was a lot of new products that came out in 2016. There'll be more stuff coming later this year, but, we're kind of in a bit of a lull. And then, there's also a trend of manufacturers increasingly wanting to get away from revealing products at auto shows and doing it at standalone events where they don't have to fight for the attention with everybody else. So, that's German companies, the German premium brands have been doing this for a few years, showing stuff, their new models a month or two before the next major auto show, revealing, photos and everything and putting out the information. And then when you get to the show, the car is there, you see it in person, but, there's no surprise or shock, and it's not really all that newsworthy. So, you had BMW showing the new 5 Series. Okay, it's nice, but we saw it a month ago. Same with Mercedes-Benz. They showed the E-Class Coupe back in December. Now we saw it in person in Detroit. As far as real news, I'd say the star of the show this year was the Kia Stinger.
Yeah, I mean so. I was looking at that, I couldn't really find a great answer. Like, is that what is that based on?
It's a new platform. So it's not based on anything that is currently within the Hyundai Kia family, but we will see other vehicles using that platform in the next 2, 3, 4 years. So it's one of the trends that we've had from Hyundai and Kia over the last decade or so. They share platforms and share powertrains. Usually Hyundai comes out with something first, and then Kia gets it a year or so afterwards. But this time Kia got to take the lead on this one. And it's a new rear wheel drive, sports sedan. It's actually a hatchback. So it's kind of a similar format to a Porsche Panamera, but it's smaller than a Panamera. It's a midsize. So it's actually kind of comparable, in size to, think of it like an Audi A5 Sportback. Which is only just coming to, the previous generation was never sold here, but it's coming to the U.S. market now. So it's a 5-door hatchback, but it's a rear wheel drive platform. So it's proportioned like a rear wheel drive sports sedan. So like longer hood, cabin pushed back, and it's really, really looks good. It's a cool looking car. And it has a great name. They actually did a Stinger concept a few years back, which was a completely different car. It was a little 2-seat sports car. And then a couple of years ago, they had the Kia GT concept, which was a bigger sports sedan. And this is actually closer to the GT concept, but they liked the Stinger name so much that they decided to use the name from that other concept on this car for the production version of the Kia GT.
I am surprised that they're coming to market with a car like this. I mean, to a certain degree, given where the market has cooled for it. But their business is strong enough. They certainly have plenty of the things that people are buying, the crossovers. So for them to do an image car, they're probably in a healthy enough spot for it, and it probably makes sense for them just to sort of raise their image. But it still surprises me, that they're having that sort of courage to do it.
I'm glad they do have the courage to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do think it's cool looking. If you read some of the internet commentary, people think that it's just, like, oh, hey, great Optima. And it's like, well, I mean, look at BMW. All their stuff looks the same. And it was like same sausage, different lengths. So, if they had made it completely different, people would say like, well, it doesn't look anything like other Kias. So, I mean, there's
they've clearly, they've taken the Kia design language that they've developed over the last 7 or 8 years, and they've continued to evolve that. So I mean, it looks much like you look at any BMW, you recognize it as a BMW. You look at the Stinger or any other Kia now, and you recognize it as a Kia. So it's got that face, especially the grill and the tail lights, and you can see hints of especially in the roof line hints of the Optima, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the overall proportions are different from what you get on an Optima or the Cadenza or K900. So there's enough similarity there to give you that Kia DNA, but it's something that's clearly different. And I think, I talked to Mike Harley, our former Autoblog colleague. He's with KBB.com now, and he actually got to go to Korea a few weeks ago on a secret trip to do a preview drive with the Stinger, and he said it's really good.
Yeah, well, and he's a serious driver.
Oh yeah.
Too, so that's interesting to hear. But if my experience with the G80 is any indication, they're getting really good at that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's going to be sort of hotly awaited when it lands actually for sale and in the fleets.
Yeah, and
I thought. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, they're putting 2 engines in there. They're 2-liter turbo 4 with 255 horsepower, and then the top engine in the Stinger GT is a twin turbo version of the 3.3 liter that's in the G80 with 365 horsepower and 376 foot-pounds of torque. And I would guess that when the next generation of the G80 shows up, or whatever comes next from Genesis, that's probably going to be the top end engine that's in that vehicle.
Yeah, which makes sense to everybody's doing it, and the sort of responsiveness of the turbo engines, they have that torque response. You can get just a big fat plateau of torque out of it that everybody seems to like, and so V8s, like they're sort of having their glorious last gasp or glorious reduction, I guess. I don't know that they're ever going to completely go away. There's something to be said for a V8, but it is wholly unnecessary.
Yeah, it's wholly unnecessary, but it's still nice to have it, and there's still some interesting stuff being done with V8s, and we'll actually one of the other big new products that did come out of the Detroit show is the 2018 mid-cycle refresh of the F-150, the Ford F-150.
Yeah, which I think it actually looks better. Mid-cycle refreshes have this. It could go either way. Like they can either look like the original car that just like sort of had some new pieces molded for it and stuck on there, but you can see through to the original. This looks all of a piece. It looks like it was really, well considered. And so they did change the grille and stuff, the tailgate, a lot of detail changes. It's not like it was in danger of not being best-selling Ford vehicle anyway.
Right.
But
what's really important about this, the styling updates are good, but the big news is the powertrains. First of all, they finally confirmed that yes, they are going to do a diesel in the F-150, which we've
that surprised me because I was like, really, like, is there that much demand for a diesel? Because like the diesel Ram was so underwhelming too. It's just like,
I don't know. I really like the diesel Ram.
I feel like that engine just takes a while to wind up. And
it's not a drag racer, but in terms of the capability, the combination of capability and fuel economy that you get with it, the towing capability and the fuel economy compared to Ford's EcoBoost engines was so far superior.
Yeah, maybe I'd have to try them sort of back to back. Something about the power delivery of that engine, and I don't expect it to be a drag racer, but it just felt like you really had to get on it, and I felt the same way with that engine in the Jeep too. Like that's the same VM Motori 3-liter turbo diesel, right? That's in both the Ram and
the engine going in the F-150 is it's also a 3-liter V6, but it's a Ford designed and built engine, which they've actually been supplying to Jaguar Land Rover for several years. So it's the same 3-liter V6 that you'll find in the current Range Rovers, and they've also offered it in the Jag XJ in Europe for several years. So it's a proven engine, and it's a really good one. I really liked it in the Range Rover, but their entire gas engine lineup is also getting an update for 2014 or 2018. The base engine, the base normally aspirated V6, has been reduced from 3.5 to 3.3 liters. And then the two EcoBoost V6s, the 2.7 and the 3.5. The 3.5 actually got its update for 2017. And then the V8, the 5-liter V8. All 4 engines now have the dual port and direct injection system that they introduced on the 3.5 for the 2017 model year. And the two EcoBoost engines and the V8 all come standard with Ford's the 10-speed automatic that Ford designed with GM.
Did they talk about sort of the justification for having so many engines? Like, there's so much overlap, and the EcoBoost V6 is just really kick the V8's ass.
Yeah, I mean, the V6s, the EcoBoost are definitely the dominant engines in terms of take rate. I think the 5-liter now, is only accounts for about 15% of F-150 sales. The 2.7 is about 40%, and then the 3.5 is the next highest, with the 3.3 and the V8 lagging behind. But the thing is, even though they're relatively small volumes, Ford sold 75,000 F-Series trucks in December. So
that's
a small share of that big a pie is still a lot of engines.
I suppose. And I mean, that's a good year for some niche automakers.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost as many as cars as Tesla shipped in all of 2016 or 2016. So, to sell that many trucks in 1 month, you're doing all right. So
some of the other detail changes are funny too. Like they're adding, like autonomous, not autonomous, but the dynamic cruise with stop and go capability, so it doesn't like wind up in stop and go traffic and then just give up and be like, nope, you take over now.
Yeah. Now
the traffic is stopped. So that's like that's a nod to like commuting, which I find it funny that it's in a truck, but then it's completely logical because trucks are used like that. So why not give the people what they want?
A lot of them are used, in city driving by contractors, and they're used by utility workers and so on. So
yeah, and you can get a Bang & Olufsen audio system in there now.
It's a B&O Play, which is not the same as a Bang & Olufsen. Bang & Olufsen sold the B&O Play brand to Harman a couple of years ago. So it's B&O, it's one of the, I think about 20 different brands that Harman has now.
Harman makes everything.
Yeah. Harman is like the Luxottica of car audio systems. So yeah, B&O Play is the brand is the new branding for Ford's premium audio systems. Branded audio systems.
So it's not Sony anymore.
Right. Yeah. They're phasing out Sony and using B&O Play going forward.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Like completely geeky, interesting, but interesting. I thought that actually the sort of biggest, most interesting debut for me at Detroit was the new Camry, which is pretty much like the old Camry.
Actually, it's actually surprisingly different. I mean, the styling has been updated. The design is definitely more aggressive. Continuing the trend they had when they did their mid-cycle refresh on the current generation.
Yeah, well, and like that's what I wanted to say too. Like, not in a bad way, is it? Like the old Camry, like the Camry, like they sell like crazy. So, again, if you're gonna have this is an interesting show. Sort of the two top selling vehicles in this market were refreshed for this show. One a lot more thoroughly than the other. Obviously, the Camry is a complete overhaul compared to the F-150, but still, what did they sort of talk up? Like, what was their sort of biggest talking point for the Camry when they rolled it out?
Well, powertrains have been updated, obviously, and both they're keeping the V6 and the 2.5 liter 4-cylinder, but both of them now have, like the Ford F-150 engines, they both have both port and direct injection, and that's a trend we're going to see more of going forward in the next several years, because it helps overcome some of the drivability issues that some people have experienced with DI engines, especially cold start. But it also helps the manufacturers to meet the tighter particulate emission standards that are coming starting in 2018. Direct injected engines tend to have a little bit higher particulate emissions than port injected engines. So having the going with the dual system helps them. They can use a combination of port and direct injection, and it gets lower particulate emissions. Not every manufacturer is going this way. Some are going to newer direct injection systems that are operated even higher pressures, so they can get better control. Like GM is using a 350 bar direct injection system now. So a bunch of different combinations that people are using.
Yeah, well, one of the problems, sort of from a service life standpoint, is that some of the cars with direct injection wind up with lots of carbon on the intake valves, which is an issue that needs to be mechanically. They need to be mechanically removed, those carbon deposits, and port injectors help that because it's basically you're spraying the valves with the solvent,
right?
So that can help out. And I'm assuming it's the Toyota D4S system that they have on a few different engines.
They've used it mostly on Lexus up until now, but they're starting to put it on the Toyota brand engines as well.
Yeah, and there are places where the port injection, because a lot of it is to get that mixing, the velocity of the charge entering the cylinder. So sometimes you actually do want the port injection because it'll just the way it gets mixed. And so, what are the new engines? Is it just the same stuff with a different name? Like are they now just calling their 2.5 liter engine the dynamic force engine? It's the same thing, or
it's the same displacement, the 2.5 liter 4 and a 3.5 liter V6, but they're now paired with 8-speed automatic transmissions. So you get the better, you're gonna have better fuel economy with the new transmissions as well. So the combination of the new fuel systems and other updates to the engines as well.
Yeah, well, that V6, I guess I should really, really dig into it, because they've said that their 3.5 liter V6 is new as well, and it's like, is it new, or is it like they've had a 3.5 for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, it's significantly revised. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not often that you get a completely new engine, new engine architecture. So it's significantly revised. I think most of the parts in it are actually, different. They're not interchangeable. But the overall architecture, so you got the same bore spacing and the same basic internal dimensions.
That kind of stuff makes sense.
Yeah. So, it packages the same way, but a lot of the details inside it are different. So, it's a different part numbers, different, passages for the intake and exhaust ports and things like that to improve flow. So a lot of detail work. So it's effectively a new engine.
And that's sort of the story of the Camry right there, is just, a lot of ongoing detail work, to just carefully revise and improve. I continue to be impressed with the Camry every time I drive it. Like, they've just managed to make it, they've managed to build it for a cost and make it solid for so many people. Like, I recommend the Camry a lot, even though it's not my favorite car to drive. Like, you can still get in one and go, this is really hard.
Yeah.
And they do a really good job doing this.
And the new Camry is built on their new global architecture that it's actually shared with the Prius. The Prius was the first one to get this architecture, and so it's now being used for the Camry as well. Different dimensions. It's a little bit longer wheelbase, a little bit wider, but similar, same platform, same basic platform.
Have you driven the TGNA Prius?
Yeah, I've driven the standard one. I haven't yet. They haven't gotten any of the Prius Primes, the plug-in hybrid yet. But the standard one, it's like night and day compared to the previous Priuses. It's so much better to drive. I
thought it felt really sporty.
Yeah, shockingly for a Prius.
Yeah, it surprised the hell out of me. The new Prius is ugly, but man, it drives nice.
Yeah, I also still don't like the interior layout, the instrument panel layout with the gauges and that little strip across the middle of the dashboard. But that's me. But
the Prius buyers like it.
Yeah,
that's. And more sort of Toyota stuff. There's a new Lexus LS too.
Oh yeah,
revised LS. So
yeah,
that's kind of big news.
Yeah, it's I think the 5th generation of the LS. The original LS actually debuted here in Detroit. 26 27 years ago, 1989.
1989.
Yeah. The first year that it was actually the first year that the Detroit Auto Show transformed into the North American International Auto Show. And that was a big year for the show. The Lexus debuted at that show. And the original Dodge Viper concept debuted at that show. So, what more could you ask for? But yeah, now Lexus is back with a new LS, which, has some pretty, when that original LS was, pretty bland, it was kind of a bland copy of a Mercedes at the time. And, this new one is something completely different. And interestingly enough, it is not available with a V8 engine for the first time.
Yeah. I think that the LS, you have the LS to thank for so much. You have the LS to thank for Mercedes and BMW being the way they are now.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they really, it was maybe a bland copy of those cars, but some of it was.
But it was executed so well.
Yeah, so well done. It raised the state of the art of the craft of auto making. There's a lot of stuff that maybe gets lost with just how that vehicle was. It was just a jewel. And yeah, I kind of, I see the same kind of thing happening with the G8. That was actually one thing that I thought of, was like they're taking the LS playbook, the G80, in the same way. But
yeah, well, I mean, there were actually, there were two cars of that period that really were kind of the turning point for premium brands globally. There was,
I know what you're going to say.
The LS and of course the original NSX.
Yep.
The LS changed the luxury car game, and the NSX set a new bar for high-end sports cars, for supercars.
It kind of put them on notice, like, hey guys, we're gonna kill you if you don't measure up.
And up to that point, Ferraris and Lamborghinis were fast, but they tended to be really unreliable, and they had terrible ergonomics, and they were expensive to service. Well, I guess they're still expensive to service, but
they still are, but they need much less, now, and it's like every car, they still need service. But I mean, we have those two cars that I was thinking about that as I was talking about the LS. Like we have the LS and the NSX to really thank for pushing things along and just getting us to this new level of perfection that's sort of like, it infuses the Camry, it infuses the the Ford Fusion, if we want to talk about domestic manufacturers, like
it's like the whole industry, it's always been a case of new stuff debuts at the upper end of the market and then filters down to the mainstream. And the reason why we have such good mainstream cars today is, to a degree, in part because of cars like the Lexus LS.
Wow, we sound really hopeful, really, really hopeful this time around. Wow.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's only because we know the world is doomed, but
eventually it is. This is what I tell my kids, because they're like, my science teacher said that the universe is going to collapse in a supernova. So I'm like, yeah, it will.
Yeah, and about 5 billion years, but
right. They get to look at Terra, and if it's like, look, we're going to die from something else, like long before that. Like, I'm going to get hit by a bus or just drop dead at my desk. Yeah. Like, just don't worry about it. We'll be dead.
Yeah, average human lifespan, 80, 90 years if you're lucky, and the world's been going for 4.5 billion, and it's going to go for another 4.5, and by that time, nobody will be around to remember it.
Well, it's so funny, like like my son, he's reading Harry Potter, and it's one of the things in there is it's sort of like Voldemort with eternal life and whatever. It's like, man, you don't want to live forever. Like at a certain point, you just want to be like, you know what, I'm done, I'm out.
Yep.
Let me finish. All right, now that we've gotten all philosophical, do we want to talk about some questions?
Sure, let's do that.
All right. Let's see. We had some questions on Facebook. We had some questions via email, and we got to the question on Twitter because that was the stinger that somebody wanted us to talk about. So we had. I know you came across a email question about the 2018 Crosstrek.
Yeah. So Rick wrote in to ask about the Subaru Crosstrek. He's thinking about buying a Crosstrek. The lease on their car is up next January, so I guess about a year from now. and they're considering the Crosstrek, and he's wondering whether the 18 model will be on the new Impreza platform, or will it just have updates like the 18 WRX. I'd say that the Crosstrek as more of I think one of Subaru's current core models will almost certainly be based within pretty much as soon as the new Impreza is available, the updated Crosstrek based on that platform will also be available. The Impreza or the WRX might lag behind by a year or so to update that one, but I think probably by next January we will probably see both the new Impreza and Crosstrek.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily let that color your decision too much, because Subaru tends to be so consistent from model to model, even when they update. The old Impreza is going to feel like the new Impreza. The current Crosstrek is going to be very similar to the new one. The new one will be a little bit more rigid, probably have some more luxury, just like we've seen with the Impreza. It's going to be nicer, the new model, but it's not like you're going to miss out on a lot if you get a good deal on the existing one. And I really like the Crosstrek a lot.
Yeah, I haven't actually driven one, but other Subarus I've driven, I've liked, so I'm sure it's quite good.
I actually like the Crosstrek hybrid a lot.
Really?
And it's not a great hybrid, but it's good. It's good to drive. It gets decent fuel economy. It's no super refined hybrid, but I didn't mind that stuff about it. I actually thought it was a good attempt, and yeah.
Okay.
Didn't offend me, and we all know how offended I can get with hybrids. I think part of it was that it has the hybrid has the thicker floor pan from the WRX, so it actually has a little bit more structural rigidity. So it drove well. All right, so we actually had, these are the Facebook questions we've got were from the same user, Anthony, and I think he's trying to reverse engineer automotive journalism here. The question from last week was, it seems the car enthusiast podcast genre is a tight-knit group. You heard about the smoking tire from listening to Adam Carolla's CarCast, and those guys also talked about Everyday Driver and regular reviews and Hooniverse. I did guest on Everyday Driver. I had them guest on the Autoblog podcast, and even this podcast is hosted on Shout Engine. How do we connect to others? I mean, we're all we see each other's work out there, and so we connect.
We're often, in the same places, for example, at auto shows, you mentioned being a tight knit group, and it's not just the podcasters, but the entire automotive journalism community. We go to the same media events with the manufacturers where we learn about their products, we and drive the cars and, go to the same auto shows. So, whenever, a big auto show comes up, it's like Old Home Week, we're seeing each other, again. And, within, the various places where, most of the journalists live, there's a whole bunch of us here in the Detroit area. There's a bunch of them in LA and New York, and a few other locations, and they often get together and hang out. And there's groups and associations like, Dan, you're part of NEMPA, the New England Motor Press Association. Yep. I'm a member of the Automotive Press Association here in Detroit. There's the Motor Press Guild in Southern California. There's the Western Automotive Journalists. I think they're based in Seattle, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere in the Northwest. And there's a few other similar groups. Right. So and of course MAMA, the Midwest Automotive Media Association.
Yeah, and look, it's the same group, like you said. It's the same group of friends and weasels.
As the great Mad Magazine would say, it's the usual gang of idiots.
Yeah, there's just some people you're really happy to see at a car show, and there's others you're like, oh, that guy.
Yeah, you see somebody walking towards you, and you immediately turn, and head the other way.
Yeah, like, oh, there's sandwiches over here.
Yeah. Oh, look, there's some coffee. I need a coffee.
Right. And so, like, are we all friends? Yeah, I mean, we're all acquaintances. We're all colleagues. You know,
and many of us are friends.
Yeah, it's a small industry. It's hard to not be friends and colleagues and friendly. And, you know, once you're on the inside of it, you know how it goes. And so you do look out for each other to a certain degree. You pass information back and forth about, you know, openings and things. And so Shout Engine, I think I started using them because Hooniverse was actually hosted on Shout Engine. And when I was doing, you know, starting up the Extra Mile, it's a really easy platform to use. And Chris Hayes, who runs Shout Engine, is tight with the Smoking Tire, and he's a good dude. And yeah, I mean, it seems to work. So hopefully there hasn't been any sort of hosting complaints from anybody, because that's the platform we use. But you know, it's just sort of like, it's like, well, that works. Everybody else is there, so yeah, sure, why not? Last part of this question is, why is the answer always WRX, G-Tire, Miata? Those are all very good cars, and they are good at what they do. It's not because there's any kind of like Kool-Aid drinking. They're just good. They're benchmarks. Sometimes cars are benchmarks.
Yeah. Just like, you know, for many years, you know, the BMW 3 Series was the benchmark for steering feel and handling, you know, especially for the guys at Car and Driver.
Yeah, but no longer.
No.
And so Anthony also had another question. Since we're now on our own, how do we still get cars? Look, kid, you're asking too many questions. Shh. Don't blow my cover. You know, he can understand you with Navigant, but how do I get cars? Well, I have an outlet and I have a following and we have some numbers behind it. And, you know, I can send in clippings back, and I'm working on a couple of other things as well that are in development. So, yeah, I'm trying not to disappear. But also, you know, the way it runs up here is maybe a little different than the way it runs in other parts of the country. So, I don't know. I've been lucky, I guess, is the way I should put it. But they give cars to a lot of people, man. You'd be surprised at who gets cars, especially if you're an influencer. If you're a mom with a blog, it's probably pretty easy to get yourself an Acadia.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, the car, depending on, you know, who you are and what you write, you know, what kind of outlet you publish to. You know, you may only have access to certain types of vehicles, you know, depending on what the manufacturers want to promote. You know, whereas, you know, somebody writing for more of a general automotive publication, you know, would have access to a broader array of vehicles. But yeah. You know, the key is, you know, for the manufacturers, you know, providing media vehicles is not an inexpensive proposition. You know, the vehicles themselves are expensive, and they require service. And, you know, particularly some of the big publications, you know, when they do their instrumented testing, you know, they're pretty hard on the cars, you know, and so, you know, they'll wear out tires and brakes and things like that when they do track testing. And so, you know, those cars, you know, require a lot more service than a typical car in use by a consumer would. So it's an expensive proposition. So you know, the manufacturers generally want to make sure that, you know, that they're going to get some coverage for providing in return for providing access to those cars. You know, there are some outlets, like, for example, Consumer Reports. You know, they have the resources to actually go and buy all the cars that they test. So they'll go out, you know, to a dealer just like any other consumer and purchase the cars that they're going to test. And, you know, when they're done with them, you know, they'll keep them for a while, you know, and do some extended testing, and then they'll sell them just like any other consumer. You know, whereas most publications, you know, they rely on the manufacturers providing access to those vehicles.
Yeah, it's a cozy relationship between industry and press. But it's like that with a lot of consumer goods too. You know, like there was when I was writing for Autoblog, and let's be clear, I'm still a freelancer for Autoblog. I just haven't managed to successfully pitch them on anything for a variety of reasons. One of them is I've been very busy, so I haven't pitched them much. That's on me. But also, like my focus has shifted, and so I'm kind of interested in doing some other things that don't necessarily match up with what their reader base is always interested in. But thankfully, there's this lovely audience to hang on my every word.
And we do appreciate you, our loyal audience, and look forward to hearing more from you. Send us your questions, and if you're so inclined, feel free to give us a review or a rating on iTunes or whatever other platform you're using to get the podcast. And
we have one review on Facebook that's very good. I'd love to see more of those. Certainly we're out there, we're around, engage with us. We're trying to build a thing, and it's going well. So
yeah.
But let us know what you want more of, and we'll give you more of that. It's easy. And with that, I think, Sam, you're exhausted.
It's been a long 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's late. So we'll come back next week. You actually did some interviews.
Yep.
So we'll put some interviews out. There's some exciting stuff going to happen next week. So we're prepared for that, and stay tuned for that. And I won't talk about it any further. But we have some cool stuff going on for the end of this month and into February. So we will come back next week with that. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.
See you next time.